Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs daily War Room Briefing. We're on day 49, I think, day 49 of the war with the Gazan terrorists. It starts obviously on the 7th of October with the onslaught of the terrorists from Gaza infiltrating Israel, 30 different civilian sites and a few army bases, murdering 1,200 plus people and taking 240 people hostage. Since then, Israel has been fighting back, really extensive damage being caused to the terrorists in Gaza and all around Gaza. Unfortunately, we see pictures of complete destruction there because the terrorists have managed to embed themselves over the years into every single corner of the urban civilian population in Gaza and to dig hundreds of kilometers of tunnels underneath mosques, schools, hospitals, you name it, they were hiding there. And now we are fighting back to destroy Hamas. On that southern front, as we have done until now, just a quick update on the different areas of fighting. And then I'll introduce our guest today, Dr. Moshe Farhi. So just quickly over the different areas. Gaza. The IDF forces are continuing their fights against the terrorists in the Gaza Strip. It's not just Hamas, it's also Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, one of those PLO organizations, and even Fatah, the members of Mahmoud Abbas, the so-called moderate Fatah party and his terrorists. There, the fighting is predominantly taking place in the northern area of the Gaza Strip, around Gaza City, and that whole enclave up there. But in the recent days, we're also now seeing the fighting extending to Rafah and to Khan Yunis in the south of the Gaza Strip. Obviously, as the IDF forces went in, the terrorists went south, and now we're going to have to get to them as well. In the north, truly worrying developments, with Hezbollah firing a salvo of, they claim, 50 rockets this morning into Israel. The IDF says we identified 35 rockets being fired in, targeting Tzfat, one of Israel's northern cities. That's the continuation of this war of attrition that's constantly going on in the north since the start of the war with Gaza. Hezbollah, the other Iranian proxy, obviously trying to extend the field of fighting and also to constantly involve our forces on that northern front, never really taking it up that next step, but also waiting for us to respond, as we have done, now killing over 75 of their terrorists. They claim that today's barrage was a result of Israel targeting other Hezbollah terrorists yesterday afternoon and yesterday evening, and even Hamas terrorists that are present in Lebanon, who were joined with other terrorists from Turkey and Iran. On the wider picture, we've also seen the continuation of firing rockets and missiles by the Houthis from Yemen, another Iranian proxy. Yesterday, as we were talking, another barrage was fired in, and they were shot down by the IDF and other forces in the area. As we go to Judea and Samaria today, there were reports from the Palestinians of a very wide scale, even wider than we've seen in the last few days, of IDF arrests in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, of Hamas and other terrorists. The situation heating up there tremendously. And in Israel, we've seen relative calm, as we discussed yesterday, and really what we're going to discuss today with Dr. Farhi. 2 nights ago, the Israeli government approved a deal to release that would bring about, hopefully, the release of at least 100 of the hostages being held by Hamas, and that in return for the release of up to 300 terrorist prisoners being held in Israel's prisons. Some of them, I myself, as a prosecutor, in my previous incarnations, in my previous positions, was responsible for sending them to prison. That deal was meant to start off already today, with a ceasefire at 10 o'clock this morning, and the start of the release of the hostages and the start of the release of the terrorists. It was held up by Hamas. Obviously, we're talking about a terrorist organization. This whole idea of psychological warfare that we discussed yesterday is very, very prevalent in everything that they do. They want to show we're the boss. We're the ones who dictate when everything will happen, when the hostages will be released, not Israel, not Israel's government. That's their goal. And so that's how they take control of the situation. So let me just, before I introduce our esteemed guest, Dr. Farhi, let me just give you an idea of what we're talking about. Dr. Farhi is going to talk to us about trauma, about dealing with trauma. So let's discuss some of the trauma just as an introduction. Some of the trauma of October 7th. Obviously, 1,200 people plus killed, burned alive, tortured, massacred, raped, really despicable things done. And as a result of that, we are left with 21 orphans, 21 children who lost both of their parents. Some of those orphans, at least two of them, probably, I've seen also reports of three of them, but at least two of them don't even appreciate or understand yet that they're orphans because their parents were murdered and they were kidnapped and taken hostage into Gaza. We're talking about children who were kidnapped with their parents. Children now having to deal with the sight of, well, their parent, who obviously is the person who protects them from everything, is now in that situation where they are helpless. Some of the children are we understand, being held with their parents, some separately from their parents. This whole trauma of what's going on there. And so now we're going to have to deal with that. Then we have obviously the four different levels of trauma that I can identify as a layman, and of really the survivors. How are the survivors going to be able to deal with the next day, the atrocities that they saw, that they managed to run away from, the family members that were killed, the first responders, the people who were there on the scene and had to see all of these atrocities and were involved in the fighting, and they lost friends and they lost brothers and they lost comrades. And how do they deal with it? And I'm not even talking yet about the soldiers. The soldiers, unfortunately, I'm leaving for last. The hostages, when the hostages come out, how do we deal with them? How do we approach them? We've seen instructions being put out by the Ministry of Welfare in Israel and the army, how to approach the children who have been in captivity, who have been separated from their parents, who have experienced this, the adults, the elderly, everyone suffering from that trauma. And then last but very much not least, the soldiers who at the moment are just required to suppress all of their feelings because they're in the war. They're on the front line. They are protecting us. And so each one of those with their own characteristics of trauma and how you deal with it. And so to give us a little bit of an insight into that, we have today with us Dr. Moshe Farhi, who's the head of social work department and founded the Stress, Trauma and Resilience Studies program at Tel Chai College, and is a co-founder of the International Center for Functional Resilience. He's an expert in the fields of acute trauma, emergency medical health intervention, and most importantly for our discussion, psychological first aid, or as they call it, PFA. This is the field in which Dr. Farhi has developed the 6 C's model to provide skills, PFA skills, to both professionals and non-professionals. Every single one of us in Israel is going to be has a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, someone connected to the hostages, someone connected to the soldiers. We all have to have some type of a basic idea of how to approach, how to discuss this on each one on their own individual level, with the relevant trauma sufferer. Sometimes obviously more obvious, sometimes less obvious. And so really, without further ado, Dr. Farhi, thank you again very much for joining us. A little bit different from our usual format. Dr. Farhi is going to present actually a presentation so that we can really understand and this will be for everyone, as I explained to Dr. Farhi before, we now have 8 billion viewers around the globe who are going to see this presentation, and really be able to take it away and long-term use for how to deal with trauma. So again, thank you, Dr. Farhi. Without further ado, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this kind introduction and for this invitation. And my name again is Moshe Farhi, and I'll be happy to discuss today the basic model for psychological first aid, and I'll try to keep in mind all the time to create some examples and how do we utilize these understandings into the immediate interventions with those children who are kidnapped, and hopefully with the adults also that will return soon. So let's start shortly with the definition of trauma. And definition go to actually two major components. First of all, the person needs to sense huge amount of threat, but the person needs also to sense huge amount of sense of helplessness. Now we know that the threat doesn't have to be directed towards the person himself. For example, if a mother receives a phone call from her son, which is in the other part of the country, and the son is under a huge threat, of course, the mother will also feel the threat, or the father. So the threat itself can be directed not only to the person, but also to relatives and people who we care about. When you have these two components together, threat plus helplessness, we start creating huge amount of fear, and all of these leads to what we call perceived trauma. And I'm emphasizing the perceived because what we know is trauma is not an event, but the way we perceive the event. So traumatic event actually is not the right sentence. We need to use the words perceived trauma. And after we are perceiving the event as trauma, we start developing like a circle of reaction, which are called acute stress reaction. And there's something tricky about these reactions, because instead of helping us to put some more effort, some more coping to the threat, it does actually the opposite. It blocks our ability to cope with the situation. For example, if the person who perceived the event as trauma is not able to talk, or maybe is unable to walk, or maybe and usually doesn't really understand his location, and sometimes the person finds it very hard to communicate with others, and many other symptoms, of course, are not helping us to provide more coping to the threat. So what actually we feel, we sense increasing sense of helplessness, and this leads to increased perceived trauma and increased acute stress reaction symptoms, increased helplessness, and all of these actually leads to what we call functional collapse. The person cannot function, or functional failure. And we know that during emergencies, we need to function. So from this simple equation, we can understand that we need, as fast as we can, to stop this circle. How do we do that? So quite simple. The event itself, the threat itself, usually it's history. So because the bomb exploded and the car crashed, and the bad news, unfortunately, were delivered and so on. So the event itself, the threat, is a fact. What we can do is deal with the other component, which is helplessness. And the opposite of helplessness is like activating or challenging the person to be active and effective. Doing this, we shall reduce the sense of trauma, and the person will be able to make more and more effective function, and to shift to routine, meaning to shift to whatever he was doing before the event happened. And by the way, not only to routine, this person in this stage can also help others. And what we know from hundreds of reports is that the time that it takes to shift the person from the total sense of helplessness into a person who is active and effective is very, very short. We are talking about 45 seconds to 1.5 or 2 minutes. That is all. So you might ask yourself, how come? How it's so simple and how it's so fast? Because we know that these people are in high risk for post-trauma. So how come it's so fast? So the answer is a bit complicated. First of all, this is correct that between 12% to 18% of people who are exposed to extreme threat might have a risk for post-trauma down the road. This is correct. But what we know now is that one of the reasons, and I might say the major reasons, that people are in this risk is us, meaning the community around. Because if you think for 1 minute, what do we usually do when we try to help a person who went through a terrible situation? What do we usually do? We shall find out that we are doing almost everything but the simple thing to encourage that person to be active and effective. Let's see some examples. For example, the first thing that almost everybody is doing, and I'm not saying that it's not okay, but we are all doing this, is hugging. But what's wrong with hugging during the acute phase? When we hug a person, there's subtext. I'm your keeper. I'm the stronger, you're the weaker. So we are increasing the person's passiveness, increasing dependency, and so on. And then we're telling the person to sit down. Now, when I tell the person to sit down, it's almost the opposite from encourage the person to be active and effective. But also we need to remember that a person in stress is also under the umbrella of the emergency physiological system, the sympathetic system. And this sympathetic system is doing many changes physiologically in order to enable the body to fight the threat. For example, our heartbeats almost double itself from 60, 70, 80 per minute to 140, 150. The priority of the blood, instead of going to the belly for digestion, goes to the legs and to the brain. So we are much faster and we are much smarter during emergencies. We have a release of huge amount of glucose, which is immediate energy that we can use. And our five senses become much more sharper during emergencies. So physiologically, the body needs to be physically activated, but we told the person to sit down. And then we tell the person to drink some water. What's wrong with that? Nothing. But we need to remember that drinking water actually stimulates the vagus nerve, which is parasympathetic nerve, meaning drinking water shifts us to like relaxation for a couple of seconds, but we need to maintain sharpness with the person. The person does not need to be relaxed at that moment. And after that, we tell the person, try not to think about that. Try to not to think about the event. Try to sing a song, look either way, and so on. And what we know is that there is no way not to think. We cannot not think. We don't have this kind of mechanism that enables us not to think about something. For example, please try not to think about pink elephant with wings flying in the skies. Can you not think about pink elephant with wings flying in the skies? Of course, whoever is trying not to think about the pink elephant will almost immediately sense the pink elephant in his memory. And by the way,
all these things, Dr. Fakhri, are things that we seem to do intuitively. To give someone who's experienced trauma a hug, I think we feel that it's something that is an expression of empathy, of sympathy, of warmth, and it appears to be not the right thing to do.
Yes, and again, it depends on the timing. Not immediately. After the person himself became less stressed, then it's okay. But while the person is stressed, this is blocking the person's ability to cope with the situation and actually increases the sense of helplessness and increases the perceived trauma. So the first principle, let's encourage the person to be active and effective. So simple. Let's provide some short tasks, very short tasks. By the way, during immediate emergency, the tasks last for 10, 15 seconds. What we need to make sure is that the person can achieve these tasks. Let's provide immediate feedback. Very good, nice. Then let's create another task. We want to maintain the person's sense of success throughout all the event. The more sense of success, the more dopamine we have, the more we see the event, we perceive the event as challenge and not a threat or difficulty.
More of empowerment than hopelessness.
Yes, definitely. So another aspect is how do we communicate? And we have two options. The first one, let's contain the person's emotions. Let's be with the person. Let's legitimate the person's feelings. Let's encourage the person to express his feelings. And the other option is let's be very cognitive. Let's be a bit detached from the person. Let's provide some very short, immediate tasks, and let's reduce the emotions. And which way to go? Let's look over again our physiological system. So this is the amygdala, the center of emotions. And this is the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our ability to function. And in order to function well, we need the dominance of the prefrontal cortex. And what we know is that there are quite interesting relations between the amygdala, center of emotions, and the prefrontal cortex, which are demonstrated in a negative relation, meaning the more I will stimulate the amygdala, the less the prefrontal cortex will be active. That is why we recommend that a communication through the acute phase should be cognitive and not emotional. And by the way, we know that communication or emotional communication during the acute phase, when a person is in high stress, actually blocks the person's ability to function. If possible, I do want to share with you two examples. The first one, it's going to be in Hebrew, but with English subtitles. It's a recording from a wedding that was in Israel about 10 years ago. And during this wedding, all of a sudden, like a huge light, huge projector collapsed on the audience. Unfortunately, one woman died and many were injured. We're not going to see that. We're only going to hear a phone call from a person who is in the wedding asking for ambulances. And please listen how the dispatcher is handling this conversation.
אמבולנסים דחוף, לידי, אולם אירועים, עדי, אמבולנסים דחוף.
אולם אירועים, עדי, באיזה עיר אתה?
באבנה, לא יודע איזה רחוב אמבולנסים דחוף, אבל דחוף, יש כאן אנשים, נפל הנורות מלמעלה מהתקרה, דחוף אמבולנסים, לידי, דחוף!
אנחנו בדרך לשם, אני צריכה שתשם מהרעש ותסביר לי מה קרה.
נפל התאורה מלמעלה, כל התאורה נפלה כאן על אנשים.
תגידי, כולם בהכרה? כולם מגיבים, מדברים?
אני לא יודע, נראה לי שם... אפילו נראה לי משומש, אני לא יודע מה הולך כאן. תביא כמה שיותר אמבולנסים, לא...
תקשיב לי, אתה יכול להגיד לי בבקשה כמה אנשים יש שם בהכרה וכמה שלא? אמבולנסים יוצאים אליך, זה בסדר.
יש פה איזה 5 מינימום שלא בהכרה.
איך קוראים לך?
יובל.
יובל, תקשיב לי, אני צריכה שתעזור לי כרגע, אוקיי? בוא נעזור להם. שתף איתי פעולה. תיגש לשם ותגיד לי כמה אנשים יש שהם לא מדברים, שהם לא זזים.
1, 2, יש פה איזה 10 בערך, אפילו יותר.
אוקיי, כמה אנשים יש שהם כן בהכרה, שכואב להם, שהם נפטרו, שהם נחתכו?
איזה 4, 5 נראה לי, אני לא בטוח.
הבנתי.
יש כאלה שמנסים להנשים אותם גם.
אוקיי, עכשיו ככה, תסביר לי מה קרה, משהו כבד או שזה פשוט מנורה קטנה שקרסה?
מלמעלה יש תאורה כזאת בעיגול, תאורה גדולה והיא קרתה לה שם על האנשים.
הבנתי, זו תאורה גדולה וכבדה?
ממש כבדה וממש גדולה.
בוא נתחיל לעזור לאנשים האלה.
אני ראיתי מישהי מתה. אני לא יכול להסתכל על זה, אני לא יכול להתקרב לשם.
יובל, הם צריכים את העזרה שלך, אני איתך על הקו, אתה לא חייב לעשות את זה בעצמך, אבל אני אתן לך הוראות שתעביר לאנשים אחרים. זה מאוד מאוד חשוב, אוקיי?
כן.
יופי, ככה, הדבר היחיד שאתה עושה, אתה מסתכל, אם מישהו מדמם, אתה לוקח בד ולוחץ על הדימום. מאוד 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 חשוב לא להזיז את הפצועים. אני איתך על הקו, אתה מאוד מאוד עוזר. בסדר, כל הכבוד, אתה מצוין, אנחנו מתדרכים כמה אנשים במקביל.
שנייה, מבקשים ממנו מאיתנו להתפנות החוצה.
אם אתה רואה מישהו שהוא מדמם, צריך לקחת בד וללחוץ על הדימום.
הנה אמבולנסים הגיעו.
Okay, so we could see how fast this person succeeded to shift from a person who is not acting and actually is very passive and very confused into a person who is acting well. And the dispatcher actually succeeded because she was using these two components to maintain the communication all the time. For example, count how many people are in this situation, count how many people are in that situation. And she was activating that person. Please do this, please do that. And by the way, when the person started to be regressive, he said something like, I cannot do that. The dispatcher did not provide any kind of legitimization. She didn't say something like, okay, it happens to everybody, and so on. What she did do, she was pronouncing a couple of times his first name, Yovel, and then she said this key sentence, we need your help. And by providing this sentence, she actually helped that person to shift from a person who is actually a victim to a person who is a helper in no time. And we could see how fast it worked. We are talking today also about children. So I want to provide another example of a child and to see how it works with children, small children. We are talking now in this example about a 5-year-old child from England. It was in all over the social networks. And all of a sudden her mother fainted, and she had a speed dial to call the emergency services 999 in England. And let's hear how, again, the dispatcher is handling this conversation with the child.
Ambulance, is the patient breathing?
Hi.
Ambulance, is the patient breathing?
What?
Is the patient breathing?
My mom fainted and I don't know if she's breathing. She's breathing or she's fainted, I think.
Okay, so is your mummy awake?
Mummy? No.
No, alright, darling. Okay, so is your mummy breathing normally?
I'm just checking.
Okay, have a little listen for me, okay?
Yes, she's breathing properly.
She's breathing properly, is she?
Yes.
Okay, right, so we're going to get some help organised for Mummy, okay? And how old are you, sweetheart?
5.
5, and what's your name?
Emily.
Okay, just reassure Mummy, is she alright?
I think. Are you alright, Mummy?
Just stay right with her, okay?
Okay.
Okay, you're doing really, really well, Emily.
Thank you.
I'm going to stay with you, alright? Just keep talking to Mummy and just keep reassuring her. So just, they're almost with you, Emily, alright?
Okay.
Is the door unlocked?
Let me just check.
Good girl.
No, it's locked.
Are you able to unlock it?
Yeah?
Yeah, can you do that for me now?
Yeah?
Good girl.
Oh.
Just be very careful, Emily.
Go.
You've unlocked the door. Good girl. Just tell Mummy we've got help organised for her, okay? We're almost there.
Okay. Mummy, we got help organised for you, so the doctor will be there soon, okay?
Do you know what the ambulance men look like?
I think the ambulance is yellow.
Yeah? Is that the ambulance, is it?
Yeah?
Okay, I'm going to leave you with the ambulance man then, okay, Emily?
Okay.
You've been an absolute superstar. Thank you for your help.
It's alright.
Thank you. Bye.
So let's just stop the share for a minute and let's summarize what we've seen until now. So we established two major principles. The first one, let's encourage the person to be active. And the second one, let's maintain cognitive communication, not emotional communication. Talking about those children who are hopefully going to be released from their kidnappers, we need to enable the children as fast as we can to be active. For example, instead of carrying them, let's enable them to walk. Almost immediately, let's provide them the ability to choose, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? Let's use the cognitive language until, of course, they reach their parents, and then it's going to be very emotional. But until they reach their parents, for example, how many children are with you? We are going to walk now for like 5 minutes or so. Let's provide numbers. Let's provide quantities, everything that can enable them to create a dominance of the prefrontal cortex. And let's explain to them what is going to happen. We're going to walk. We're going to meet your family. You're going to see your pets, dog or cat or whatever. And then you'll see a doctor and he will examine you. And then you'll go home and then you'll go to sleep and so on. So the more encouragement for the child to be active and effective will reduce the perceived trauma. And the minute we start think that the child is being active and effective, that would be great. Let's talk about another. Yes, sir.
Difference, Dr. Fakhi, between situations of children or even people, just adults experiencing that extreme trauma as part of an instant event, a car crash, someone fainting, and then this extended period of being held captive and getting used to this almost new situation.
Well, in one hand, it's different, of course. In the other hand, we need to remember that trauma is not a lasting event. It's actually in episodes. During these 5 weeks of being captured, some episodes will be recalled as trauma. And the episodes are going to be the extreme ones. For example, sound of noise, a sound of shot, a sound of screaming, taking the parent away from the child. These will be experienced as trauma. And we know during any kind of intervention that we always make our intervention on what we see. And we are going to see symptoms. We're going to see symptoms of confusion. We're going to see symptoms of maybe hysteria. We're going to be symptoms, and we're going to target those symptoms. Even though it is true that those children and adults might develop post-trauma, on the initial phase, we are just responding to the immediate symptoms in order to reduce it. Then, afterwards, we should start going back to the whole story and develop the more comprehensive interventions.
How long would it take, Dr. Fakhi, between the moment of being released or just prior to being released, when you're still in that trauma itself, and then suddenly you see, I don't know, you see soldiers in green uniforms and you see something which is almost familiar and almost safe. I think most people in Israel, when they see a soldier, they have an automatic feeling of safety. I think, and definitely for children, it's soldiers. Just to explain to everyone, soldiers are all over the place. Soldiers are part of our families, and so it's not something which are seen sporadically. How long does it take to make that transition from that extreme tension, that extreme trauma, to suddenly now you're in a safe place?
It will take time, and the reason for that is that, unfortunately, the terrorists during the event, the 7th of October, were dressed as Israeli soldiers, and the children could not make the difference between real one and a terrorist. And I do expect that they will hesitate whether to believe that it's a real Israeli soldiers at the beginning.
Well, is that something that is being taken into account, that some of these people may have now a possible distrust of soldiers because of that, of what happened?
Yes, because what we know is that the children need to hear the Hebrew language and need to hear all the time their first name, and that is what the soldiers that are going to meet the children are going to do. They're going to speak with them, of course, Hebrew, and they're all the time going to repeat their name again and again and again, and they're going to explain to them, my name is this and that. They're going to introduce themselves. We are going to walk, and so on and so on, and that will be okay. Yes, but the initial stage, for example, I was walking in my army uniform a couple of weeks ago in Eilat, where many evacuated families were there, and actually children saw me in a uniform and were asking the parents, is it a real soldier?
Wow.
Even though they were in a lot.
That's crazy. That's but it would appear that what you're explaining to us now, sometimes you hear things and it has a relevance, and you don't necessarily know how to put it into the right context, and only once you hear, I don't know, an explanation like you've just given us, I hadn't necessarily given enough importance to the idea of receiving prior to the release, the list of the people who are coming out, so that immediately once you can meet them, you can have the pictures, you can say, well, this is Yovel, this is Shimon, this is Levi. You can immediately,
that is why it's so important.
In their first names.
Exactly. That's why we need to know as much or as fast as we can the first names or the nicknames, so we can address the children with their nicknames. Exactly.
And also family names. And so how do we then deal with the next step? So we've met the children, we've tried to reinforce them and to enable them rather than just smothering them.
The next step.
So what's next? How do you then move on? Do we would everyone need a type of therapy? Is it best to discuss these events with them? Is it best to say, well, we'll give you your time and you'll tell me when you're ready? How do we take it to that next step of people we know and are close to, who obviously the natural response, I think, of most people is to just run up and want to give them a hug, which we understand isn't possibly the best thing to do in the circumstances. What's that next stage after initially we've greeted, we've understood? Next stage?
No. First of all, when parents are meeting their children or relative meeting their children, let's give them a huge, big hug. No problem with that. This is okay. I won't argue with that. But what is the next step, which is very important? And actually, this is another very important principle. What we know is during emergencies, we are flooded with so huge amount of information. But we are also flooded with stress hormone, and this cocktail with information and stress hormone actually leads us to be very, very confused, because we are flooded with so much information, but we cannot put the data, the information, in its right chronological order, like a sequence of chronological events. In other words, we are very, very confused. And why it's so bothering us, this confusion? Because when a person is very confused, also the ending point of the events is not located where it should be. It's somewhere in the huge amount of salad of information, but it's not located where it should be in the end. And that leads to a subjective feeling that event is not over. And how do we know that? Because we see people who were exposed to traumas and they start reporting about flashbacks, intrusion thoughts like 2-3 seconds of thoughts, and then those 2-3 seconds becomes like a short clip of 10, 15, 20 seconds of a thought that is just repeating itself again and again and again and again. And this is because our brain, our memory is trying to find the ending point, but it's not located where it should be. So it's just repeating again and again and again. And what we know is that the more we are going further in the time from the event, we have a less chances to enable the person to make the right chronological order. And by the way, more or less, after a couple of weeks, this window of opportunity is reduced and the person starts experiencing those intrusion thoughts.
How do we, if I may just interrupt, how do we then, if we take away from the hostages, it appears what I said in my introduction then is again completely wrong and not the right thing to do, with our soldiers, with our first responders, people who are constantly in this ongoing trauma, because they have a job to do, but their job itself is trauma. And if we don't address the stress and that trauma almost immediately, it would appear that we're doing more long-term damage. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, but we can prevent that very simply. It's so simple. What we need to remember that in every event that we have done, every session, we need to summarize the event, just the facts, and put the facts in its right chronological order. For example, just starting walking with the child towards the safe place. Let's start summarizing the event. So you were in Gaza, and now we are walking. In the next time, you are going to meet your family, and then you're going to be checked up, and then you're going home. Let's make the sequence of event. And as for first responders, the recommendation is very simple and with huge importance. After each and every time you're involved in any kind of action, make a summary, a very short summary of the facts of the event. Make sure that this summary is in the right chronological order, emphasizing the ending point of the event.
For the children who are lucky enough to still have parents who are coming now back from captivity, some will be leaving parents there. Would it be beneficial for the parents to be there at the site of the release? Or we often hear about this process with hostages of them first being released, taken into the custody of friendly forces, let's call them, and undergoing all types of medical examinations just to establish their physical state. Is it better to jump immediately to the emotional side of the meeting with a loved one, with a parent, or is it better to go through this process of almost, as you said, almost small things but important things that have to be done as part of a process that builds up to this almost emotional meeting?
So two answers for that. First of all, well, we cannot prevent nobody from hugging the children. It's going to be done. This is a fact. Because we want to hug them. But what we are doing parallelly is we should provide the parents, okay, with explanation what should be done with the children after they hug them. And actually all the things that have been saying until now, we are going to explain also to the parents. So they will, or the relatives, they will meet the children and they will know that they have to encourage those children to be more active. They will know to try to maintain cognitive communication. They will know to create a short summary, very short summary of the events that happened, very just highlights.
I mean, they themselves, the survivors The family members are also people who are in those categories. It's not a neutral outsider. It's not a first responder. It's not an ambulance or emergency operator. These are people who themselves are in that whole really cyclone of feelings and stress and emotions. And suddenly they also, is there a benefit to that they are being taken out of their position as someone suffering from a trauma, and now they need to be the ones supporting someone else?
One of the best things that we can do during those kinds of events is to have a role of a helper. So if you shift the role of the parents from being the victims into being the helpers and the parents and the adults for the children, that will be great. And of course, I do not forget that the parents need their help as well. And they will receive their help as well. And also the help for the parents in the beginning will be in this sequence and these principles. Further on, each one will receive his own needed help. We have a say in psychological aspects. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Meaning, please let's respect defense mechanisms. So if there is a person who is functioning well, we know that this person went through a terrible situation, but the person is functioning well. In this situation, let the person function. Let's treat him afterwards.
Is high functioning though a indicative of the fact that the person has almost got over that emotional trauma? I do a lot of work with victims of terror. I have one really a very close friend who experienced a horrible event, stabbed multiple times. Her friend was murdered, and now she, when you see her, she is a high functioning person, truly amazing. But when you discuss with her what's going on a little bit, she says that she experiences flashbacks, 10,000 flashbacks a day, just thousands all the time, just reliving that whole situation over and over again. I would imagine that this is something that a group of these people will experience no matter what.
Possible, yeah. So if the person is only functioning but experiencing flashbacks, we need to take care immediately of these flashbacks. Yes, this is correct. But if the person is functioning without flashbacks, let the person function.
That's amazing. Dr. Farhi, I myself would like to go on talking to you for hours and hours, because I think that this is a subject which is tremendously fascinating and really does and is going to affect many of our lives. I hope in the very near future, with the release of all of the hostages and with the end of the fighting, and our sons and brothers and daughters and sisters and mothers coming home and then trying to help them unpack that whole situation. But time is unfortunately run away from us. If I could ask you to just give our viewers a closing sentence and maybe a referral to the ICFR website and what other additional materials they can read up on in order to be most effective when dealing with these types of situations.
Oh, yeah, yes. Just to say that this model has been recognized by the Israeli Ministry of Health as a national model for psychological first aid. And what we try to do in this model is to provide the tools, as you have said before, sir, to the whole population. And we know that it's very good to have these kind of tools. So my recommendation is just go over this website, just look on this very short guidelines, which can help each and every one of us. It doesn't have to be emergency. And it could be a daily life in which a person who is just right now in sort of a panic attack, or a child who is just being injured and we need to provide him some physical but also emotional help and so on. It's good for schools, for teachers, and it's also good for wars, unfortunately.
Dr. Farhi, thank you very much. For those people who are interested and would like to read a little bit more, go onto the website of the International Center for Functional Resilience, ICFR, or if you look up just Dr. Farhi's a name on the internet, it takes you almost immediately to the site. Look for the 6 C's method or model, and that's a way to get into it. I know that I myself spent a couple of hours this morning going over it, trying to understand. I am, as my wife would describe me, a little bit emotionally impaired, and so trying to understand these things and how to respond and really the best way to function when you are put into this situation. It's really quite helpful to get the extra instruction. So thank you, Dr. Farhi. Thank you all for joining us. We will be back with you again tomorrow. Actually, no, sorry, I apologize. Tomorrow is Friday, and Shabbat is still early. So we will see you again on Sunday afternoon, 4 o'clock Israel time, 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern Standard Time, and very early on the West Coast, but a more normal time in Australia. We will. Our guest will be Dumisani Washington, who will be giving us a little bit of an insight into also what's going on in America, what's going on with the different, really the different communities in America, and how they're seeing and perceiving what's going on in Israel, and then understanding that and translating it for them. Dr. Farhi, thank you again. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Stay safe, and as we said, a prayer for the return of all the hostages. I would cautiously say again, subject to the manipulations of the terrorist organizations, that whilst we were discussing, news came out that tomorrow at 4 o'clock, 13 of the hostages will be released, and that the ceasefire will allegedly start at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. So we will again hold our fingers and cross our fingers that will actually happen. Again, subject to that reservation and caveat that we are dealing with a homicidal, genocidal terrorist organization who's trying to all the time not only kill us but play with our feelings. So on that note,